Hey everyone, today we're going to be looking at our final assignment for the semester, which will be looking at a performance improvement, and we're going to be doing a constraints coaching task using Ultimate Frisbee as the game. This will be worth 40%, as you can see in the task sheet on the screen right now. Before you watch this screencast, it might be worth you just flicking through the task sheet first just to have a look at the general gist of what to do with the task. So we're just going to flick straight through to the aim of the task or the description. So basically what you're doing is in pairs or threes, that's up to you. Your task is to plan and conduct a lesson using a constraints-led approach to develop a learning objective game of your choice from Ultimate. So basically we're looking at delivering a 40-minute lesson. That can be 45 minutes if you wish. That basically becomes more challenging for a group of Year 7 students. With the general aim of playing a game of Ultimate Frisbee. This will be done on Friday week 4 in lessons 5 and 6, which is noted on sector, and you'll be teaching a group of 8 students. So you have 3 of you guys teaching 8 students, so it shouldn't be a problem at all. So just let me change this markup to show you a few notes I've written on each of the points you need to do. So for part 1 for the planning considerations, this can be done in pairs. So you've got a bit to do here, but you can do this part in pairs, and then you'll have part 2 after you've conducted the lesson where you'll need to do a response individually to the task that you've completed. So part 1, before planning a session, this is what you need to do. In your pairs, you need to come up with a learning objective or game concept you want to develop. So we're talking about tactics, skills, or equipment. So you need to think of something that you want to develop with your group of 8 students. So if we go to the notes up here, these are some of the learning objectives that you might choose. You might choose that you want them to get better at self-refereeing. You might choose backhand throwing technique. You might choose catching or receiving. You might choose how to mark players or marking players when we throw the Frisbee to start with. And then we also have supporting with depth and width, which is what we spoke about in the last lesson. There are other objectives that you may choose. These are just some examples of which one you may choose. Then you need to consider what stage of learning you think these Year 7s would be at. So you should know the 3 stages of learning. If you don't, you need to refer to the PowerPoint, which is also attached on sector, which we've been looking at, and you'll be able to look at the 3 stages of learning. And from our class discussions, you should be able to pick which stage of learning a group of Year 7 students who have not completed Ultimate Frisbee before would be at. So think about Year 7 students and not having completed the game of Ultimate Frisbee before. What sort of characteristics they might display. Will some skills transfer over from other sports? And you need to consider the next dot point for how you actually coach the students. So we've looked at the coaching styles as well in lesson, and you need to pick what sort of coaching style you adapt, but also not just focusing on one coaching style the whole time. You might actually use a combination of coaching styles. If that is the case, you need to outline when you would change coaching style and why. So obviously we've looked at cognitive learners require an authoritative coach because they don't have much of an idea of the sport themselves, so they need lots of instruction. However, there might be times throughout your session where you might act as a casual coach, or you might act as a democratic coach. You need to tell me if you're going to do that, and obviously give the reasonings behind that. Maybe identifying some of the characteristics of these coaching styles may also help you explain that. And then we need to move on to the question, how will the chosen constraints support student development of your intended objective? So you need to choose certain constraints that you're going to change throughout the lesson. They're going to help your students basically learn the game of Ultimate Frisbee. So for your homework task, you should have done this already. However, if you want to have another look at the article and the task that I asked you to do, that is in the PowerPoint. Slide 19, this is the article here. Have another read of it, and that should be able to help you understand the constraints that you might need to change. But just off the top of my head are some things you might want to do. You might want to change, obviously, the playing field, the size, teams. Obviously, we don't want to be using the Frisbee the whole time, especially if it's windy. So what equipment can you change? You might change to a vortex. You might change to a bigger ball to make it easier for the students to throw and catch. These are your decisions to make. So tell me what constraints you will change and what you will use, what constraints are, and how you would change those in response to the stage of learning the group is at. Next up, what you need to consider what type of feedback you would give these students. So if you we looked at feedback the other day, we looked at the 8 types of feedback. We also put or categorize those types of feedback into cognitive and autonomous learners. So think about your stage of learning, what feedback is required for the cognitive stage of learning, which I'm assuming you're going to identify the Year 7 group at, and what types of feedback, what sort of things are you going to be saying throughout your lesson. Again, refer back to the class discussion that we had on that topic. And then the final part is submitting a lesson plan. So this is going to be the hardest or maybe most detailed part of this part 1, which we need to submit this as an appendix. So you'll write part 1, part 2, you'll have an appendix, which is where you'll attach your lesson plan. So attached on sector is an example lesson plan of a Gaelic football lesson and a blank lesson plan, which has the same outline as the example lesson plan, just without the different sections filled in. So if you want to refer to the PowerPoint down the bottom, we have the lesson plan and how to develop a lesson plan, looking at the example lesson plan for your assistance. So let's look at the first part of the lesson plan, which is just a basic outline of the lesson. So if we refer to the example lesson plan, you would write your name in here, the time at which you will conduct the lesson, the date, the activity which you are conducting, the year level of the class, and then the equipment that you will need to have for the lesson. Now, this is obviously extremely important that you submit this for equipment purposes, so the teachers know what equipment you require, and we can direct you to the right place to get that equipment before the lesson. So that's really important. That's the easy bit. The next bit is actually developing the lesson plan and how it will run for the entirety of that 40 to 45 minutes. So we have the first column is the learning outcomes you have, what the activity is, so the method of the activity, some focus cues or questions that you need to remember for your lesson, and then we have the organization, or what the organization of your class will look like when you are teaching, and then finally the time, how long each activity will go for. So let's look at the example lesson plan and what this looks like filled out. So obviously we have here the first activity is stuck in the mud. So from our lesson the other day, for those who are here, stuck in the mud is what we know as a GLO. And a GLO is a game of low organization. So these are games that will get the students to warm up. It gets them engaged in the lesson and kind of goes away from the traditional go for a jog, do a stretch type warm up, as they're generally fun, and the games of low organization suggest that it doesn't take a lot of organizing to get these activities on the road. So stuck in the mud is a very easy activity. It just needs 2 lines, and then you need to give some brief instructions on the taggers and what the students must do. So obviously for learning outcome, this one is we just want to show enjoyment and fair play while participating in the warm-up, and we want to contribute to a positive learning environment to set the lesson up. So this is a similar learning outcome that you may have. Try not to obviously copy these, but show something similar in what the outcome is that you want of the warm-up. So the warm-up will go in the introduction phase of the lesson. So when you have the name of your activity, you then do step by step how you are going to explain the activity. You might also include some variations in the activity. So for stuck in the mud, you might do some skipping or something like that. So remember those GLOs we looked at the other day, and there's also a list attached on sector in a previous lesson. The focus cues for this focus cues might be something you might say to the students throughout that task. So while they're completing Stuck in the Mud, you might say, "I'll stay in the field, guys. Make sure you don't go outside the boundaries." Or you might say, "Keep your eyes up so you don't run into each other." You might also have some questions. How can we avoid getting caught while also trying to free one of our teammates? So it's important that you have questions in that focus column as well. And then you have the organization of the class. So you've got the square field here for Stuck in the Mud. You've got some taggers, and it looks like this example has 8 players or students in it, just like you will. And then we have the teacher here. Obviously, we want to have the teacher moving around the class throughout the lesson so you can get to all the students to provide feedback, which we are outlining in this task 1 as well. Then you look at the time that will take. So 3 minutes for Stuck in the Mud for this lesson in particular. Then you move on to your next game. So obviously you're choosing your games or your development periods of a lesson based on what objective you want to develop. So we've looked at doing end zone games, partner passing, changing the object that you're throwing or passing around, passing to score in hoops, different scoring opportunities, basically looking at trying to develop their knowledge of the game over a period of time. So this is what your next activities are going to be until you then conclude the lesson. So this is what the lesson plan looks like. So you need to fill this out with your partner with the lesson that you plan to deliver for that 45-minute lesson on Friday. So fill out this blank one here and attach that to an appendix for your assignment. If we go back to the task sheet, this is all you need to do for part 1 before the lesson. Part 2 is the evaluation on how you think your lesson went. So if we look at these dot points in very briefly, because I know this is going for a long time, you need to look at the effectiveness and how effective the constraints were for your skill learning or coaching, how effective the coaching styles were that you adopted during your lesson, how effective your communication was, the effectiveness of your session in relation to achieving your learning objective that we looked at the start, and then reflection on the feedback that the students give you on your lesson. So what changes could you do to improve participation and or performance of the students? So a way you can get feedback from the students is you might have some feedback forms that you develop so that you can attach that in an appendix, and that might help you complete these questions. You might also just record them answering some questions at the end saying, okay, what did you enjoy about the lesson? What could be improved? Did you enjoy this part of the lesson? Did you enjoy the game? Did you enjoy the warm-up? So you can get a bit of a gauge on what to write for your evaluation for part 2. Something that I would definitely consider doing is the students that are not actively teaching at the time. So you might have someone do the GLO, then you might have someone do the development, and you might swap activities depending on what you want to each do. But I would be taking photos of your lesson throughout the entirety of the lesson. So you can then add those in as figures and points to refer to in relation to your evaluation. So if you're looking at your constraints approach, you might take a photo of the activity you're doing where you've changed some constraints, and you can refer to that photo as part of your evaluation. You might also look at your objective and game concept. If you're doing, say, marking players and making sure everyone is playing man on man, then you might take a picture of the lesson with both students in different bibs playing on each other to show evidence of them marking each other. So showing evidence or providing evidence can be through photos, through video recordings of feedback that you receive, or maybe some feedback forms as well. So this is something you must also consider when planning your lesson. I hope that's detailed enough on what you need to do. Of course, email me if you have any questions. Other than that, good luck, and I'll see you in week 4. Thank you.